guys, I want to show you some boost leak thing we're doing right now on a Supra. But look, I just walked in here and there's Johnny Carolina over here.
From North Carolina.
From North Carolina. And then he's doing pictures of billet pieces. He'll be on the website soon, guys. You can check him out. Oh, Turbo, what's up? Hi.
Hey, Dad.
Oh, what's up? Oh, I gotta go. Look at the pictures. Alright, guys. Richard's car is under the microscope right now. So, we were getting a failsafe to be activated. It happened once, not on the dyno, once like after it left the dyno when the car's like pulling its own weight, and there's also friction from air, and it's like, it's just a safety in the Pro EFI that's gonna save the motor. So it says it's leaning out a little bit, and then the Pro EFI will compensate, and it'll do it for a third of a second, and then if the compensation that it's sending, which is more duty cycle for the injector, is trying to add more fuel, if it doesn't go down, it's not happening on the AFR side of things, which is in the exhaust, then it goes, we're done, and then it puts the safety and it cuts you out. So Richard was experiencing that, not every time, but it's like a hit and miss type thing, like on and off, the safety will activate. And he's like, what is it? And I'm like, well, we'll have to figure it out. And so then he brought it back here. We were able to get it to trigger that fail-safe. And then becomes the hard part, you're troubleshooting. Why am I, but we're not seeing fuel pressure drop on the logs. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing necessarily a boost difference. It's like within like 2% on the AFR, perfect tune, and then perfect log, you'll do one, and then you'll do another one, same exact scenario, and it goes lean. So it's like kind of inconsistent. So we're thinking it could be a sensor, or it could be fuel pressure, it could be voltage drop, it could be just so many things. So we narrowed down by taking out the fuel pumps and doing a bench test with a fuel pressure regulator connected to them, taking them up to 75 psi, which is around what this will do when it's, you know, under 30 pounds of boost. Neither of the pumps had an issue. I've had sometimes where the pump like can make pressure, but it can't make volume and pressure, and it will like backfeed and leak through the housing. Wasn't the case. Pumps are good. Filters, there was a filter that we didn't like, but it was like clean, so we just were like, okay, let's put a Radium 6 micron high flow inline filter. We put that in. Didn't solve the problem. We kind of knew it wouldn't, but we're just gonna try, you know. Then we took the injectors out, flow tested. They were within 7%, not the greatest, so they had a little bit of crap in there. We cleaned them, flow tested again. They're kind of within like 3% now, which just seems really good. That's about what you get them when you buy them new from, you know, wherever you're buying them from, with their flow test sheet that comes with the new injector. So then we're like, okay, probably most likely was not that. We haven't gone back out to get another log since we did the injectors, but then we did a boost leak test, which is what this is. We like kind of have this with different size piping. Most of the time we're gonna use a 4-inch opening, so it has this expander right here, and we would get it to hold 10 psi. At first we heard a leak. The leak came from this guy. Has 2 blow-off valves, unfortunately. There's one right here, and there's one behind that one right here. It's hard to see it, but there's 2 HKS Super sequential. I said unfortunately because you don't need 2 blow-off valves, people. You only need 1. And yeah, anyway, so he wanted 2, he has 2. One of them, there was like a little leak in the hose, so we pulled that part of the hose off. It was like this little tiny piece of hose though, and it had a really small leak. I should have saved it and showed you guys. Let me see if I can find it. So then we fixed that. That would have only been, oh, it's right here. Okay, so there's, let's find the leak. Oh, right here. Had that pinhole from chafing, basically. It's a tight area in here, and one of the hoses just over time was touching something. This wasn't a new hose. This was the hose that had been on there when Rich brought the car originally. So then we're not sure how much could even leak out of that. Like, you're gonna lose some PSI, but you're not gonna lose like 20 PSI through this hose. So by switching that, it should make the problem even worse, is what we're thinking. Or, this is the other thing we're thinking, it's like, in a way, it's similar to a wastegate where like it needs the boost that comes through that vacuum line to keep that end of it shut until you've released off gas and you shut your throttle body, and then there's no boost in the intake manifold for that split second, and then it will allow the wastegate to open. Joe's using a hammer. So then what we were thinking, with it leaking there, it could never hold the boost to close it. So maybe at like 20, we didn't set this up to like 30 pounds. We set it up to 10, found the leak, then pulled that off and fixed the hose, then went to 20 and then 25. So what we're thinking is possibly it wasn't holding the backside of that blow-off valve shut, and so it would just kind of crack open and bleed off boost. And then every once in a while it would kind of stick shut, and then that would activate. So in theory we would have tuned it with like a little bit of a boost leak. So we got to go test it, see what we get out of it. It might activate earlier in a lower gear now, and the failsafe will have activated, and we'll have to then, which sucks, but retune the whole car for a different air fuel ratio, because the efficiency of the turbo would now have changed because there's no leak. What we should have done is do like a really critical boost leak test the second we set it all up, but like customers usually don't ask you to do that, so unless we have an issue we don't usually do that, because like these couplers don't leak. They'll leak at like 30 pounds, and you put 30 pounds in there and let it sit, they'll slowly leak over time, and some of it'll leak into the motor or whatever. But what we're concerned about is like an instant hole. So anyways, good to know, found it. But now it's making me think like I should be doing this test, like just include that in part of like what's gonna happen if your car gets built at the shop, because it'll save us time, save the customer time in the long run. They do have to pay for the time up front that they wouldn't have had to pay for, but it's probably minimal. That might not be our issue though. That's like a guess that that's our issue. What we kind of really think is the issue is fuel pump voltage is dropping. So this car is set up not how we would have done it. You know, if you asked us to do it right now and put 2 pumps in a Supra, we'll get a radium fuel pump hanger, and we'll do 2 Walbro 450s in there. This has 2 Walbro 450s. Rich showed up with, see how it's already modified to have this AN fitting coming out, and it worked, and he had a PTFE line, so it's like 2-6 feeds, and that feeds each side of the rail. In theory, that's enough fuel to make 1,000 horsepower, it'll work. It's not ideal, but he had spent a lot of money already on some other stuff, and he said, well, let's just make it work. Like, he's kind of like burned out on just dumping money and rebuilding his whole car, you know, like we don't blame him. So everything should work. It has 2 fuel pump relays, and they're fed by this nice thick wire, which is sufficient to get this far from the front of the car back to here. There could be some voltage drop there on the length of that, and then also it leaves this and it goes in these black wires, which are nice gauge, like looks like they're 10 gauge, could be 12, 10 depending if it's Tefcell. It looks like 12, no, it's 10 gauge Tefcell. It looks like these don't feel like Tefcell though. No, they're too soft. Those are probably 10 gauge non-Tefcell. Anyways, but then it goes to this, and it goes through this connector, and then through this and up into this stock plug. And this stock plug used to be 1 power, 1 ground. These thicker wires, which look like they're about 12 gauge, should work for what we're doing here with that fuel pump. But that's old wiring from the 90s. It's kind of iffy if it should work, and it passed through this connector, then it passed through this connector. We mentioned this to Rich. It could work, and then it could cause an issue, but you kind of don't know till you go do it, and then it's up to the customer to be like, yeah, spend a day rewiring and putting different fuel pumps and the cost of the new pump hanger from Radium. And it's like, does he want to go that route? He just kind of said, oh, it should, you know, we said it should work, and it kind of should, and then he said, yeah, let's do it this way. And it did work on the dyno, but we're wondering if with the added heat and the voltage drop from the alternator back to here, that we're not even seeing sufficient voltage. So what we're seeing is 13.2 during the pull under like the max load. We're seeing 13.2 from the alternator. That's not great. That's actually like pretty poor. And then you have to imagine there's got to be some drop. And then when it changes size of the gauge of wire, there's a little bit more drop. So unfortunately we can't put it on a, we need to load it up on a dyno and then get the result on a dyno, or possibly mount a multimeter back here that's probing each wire, tape it down, mount a GoPro, or mount this camera back there, tape it down so like the forward acceleration G's wouldn't trigger it, and then go back on the street and put it in third gear and see if we can get it to activate the failsafe. Most likely it wouldn't happen, and there's all this time setting it all up. So then the next thought was put in the RAD 160 high output, like 160 amp alternator, and then we know that that would just immediately up the voltage. So then you're kind of, in a way, you're masking the problem. But hear me out. So let's say you mask the problem in order to go do a couple test runs, see where we're at. Let's say we see 14.6 volts during the run at the alternator or at the ECU on the log. Then you lost some going to the back of the car, but it had enough voltage to create the pumps will have enough amperage or whatever, and it's not going to draw so much that we see like we weren't seeing a drop in fuel pressure. What we're seeing is the pumps, or what we're guessing is the pumps aren't making the volume that we're asking for, the flow and the volume. It's making the pressure, but it's not delivering the volume of fuel we need. And that's why when the Pro EFI jumps in there and tries to up the duty cycle on the injectors, we're not seeing it, like, on the other side where the AFR is not like receiving enough fuel, so you still continue to lean out by like 10%, and then we say let's shut off. So we're gonna try that alternator, and we've also fixed, we usually don't like to fix two things or do two things at once, but we did. So we're gonna go back out there and see what result we get with a different alternator in there. If the alternator does nothing and this does nothing, there's something tricky going on here, like maybe, because the plugs look fine, so maybe it's not that and it's like something else messing up, but we'll find out shortly and then get back to you guys. Ooh, Peter just walked in. Peter.
Best 2JZ builder right here. If you guys need something built, Supra 2JZ, Dan's the man.
Great Supra owner.
Dan's the man.
Alright guys, see you later. Alright guys, we found another issue. So this is just for testing. We got the RAD 160 in there. For some reason, it's not seeing a charge, so there's missing. So we have the stock, for the most part, it's mostly a stock engine harness out of Richard's car. The difference here is the RAD 160 self-exciting. You can't even see it, so I'm not gonna, you guys get the idea. So we ran another second wire additional over to the battery, so that inside on the laptop we're seeing 14 volts from the system. Before we were seeing 13, but now we're seeing 14. The only difference here is we had to add that wire. It's kind of weird. We're not sure if it's because there's like the trigger wire that would have, I don't know, on stock Supras I've been able just to throw that alternator in and it worked fine. So something's up, but we're gonna go test it. Then we'll have at least a positive or a negative, and we'll be able to check more things off the list that it was or wasn't. So we'll be back shortly with more info.